Welcome everyone to my presentation today. I'm very excited about this because myself, I've had a long career working with smallholder macadamia, and I'm delighted to see that so many of you have been able to come today and to meet and to discuss. So I would like to contribute to this function by providing a bit of an assessment of what we think is going on in the smallholder production system with a focus on how to increase productivity and quality coming from your fields. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things that we can talk about in this subject, but I would like to kind of bring out some of the most important things that we think that are constraints that are stopping smallholder macadamia farmers from really fully benefiting from the crop, and also explain some of the reasons for the low productivity. Okay, so firstly, it's important to realize that smallholders are a very, very diverse group. They're a diverse group in terms of how they approach the crop, the number of things they're using their land for. Commonly, macadamia is not treated as a orchard crop, although some farmers do intend to establish orchards. By far the majority of fields that we see are intercropped, either with a secondary cash crop such as soya or other pulses, or staple crops such as maize. Now this places automatically smallholder farmers who have got these small land units and lots of different things going on in the field in a very different type of production system that is seen on commercial farms. And I think if there's one thing to really learn from today, is that for smallholder macadamia to be successful, it has to learn from the commercial farms, but then adapt the production system so it's more appropriate, it's simpler, to enable smallholder farmers to kind of benefit from the crop. So here we have got 12, 13, 14, 15 different farms, all smallholders, and all look quite different. We have got people who've planted very evenly in square fields. We've got people who have just fitted the trees into the parcel that they have. You have people who've established the trees in 1 or 2 seasons, and you have people who've progressively increased the number of trees in their orchards over many years. All these factors influence how productive the farm is. So what are the main characteristics that we see? We see that the orchards are generally established over many seasons, and this means that the trees come into production more slowly. You've got mature trees with immature trees, so the overall productivity of the field is far lower. Also, importantly, that increases the waiting time. When we think productivity should start like in year 5, 6, if you make the orchard establishment over 10 years, you're going to be waiting almost 20 years before all the trees in that orchard reach their full productivity. I think particularly with smallholder farmers where they are looking for a cash crop, where they want to get more revenue from their farms, where possible, ensure trees are established in blocks. And this can really help the uniformity and organization of the field. Often many farmers can't really control which clones or varieties that they're planting, and because of this, over many years they acquire lots of different varieties. Now this is very different to the estate sector, which generally focuses on planting 3 to 5 clones systematically in the field, and this means that the yield is more predictable and there's fewer low performing trees. Even if you have in a field of 100 trees, if 10 are of a variety that is not going to perform well, that reduces the productivity quite significantly over time. Another thing we see is that there's a lot of different intercropping going on, from staple crops, cash crops, very wide range of things. and that can have a negative impact on productivity. Although it can increase the utilization of the field and maintain it as a multi-use field for multiple incomes, there is a cost associated with that. And many times we see that intercrops are cultivated far too close to the macadamia trees, and this damages their rooting system because of the action of the kazoo and tilling the land, which can damage the trees and make them less vigorous, less productive. So they need more space around them. That it's largely an organic production system. There's some mulching, there's some residual impact from fertilizers, but not very many farmers, a massive majority, are not utilizing any input specifically for the trees. That's got nutritional implications. Smallholders are not irrigating, although particularly during establishment, supplemental irrigation is really important to getting mortality rates low. And because of that, because it's rain fed, a lot of the smallholder areas are in upland areas that you're all aware of, with better rainfall patterns. Now, rain fed macadamia is the norm in the old estate system in Cholo, and it limits productivity to about 2 tons, maybe 2.5 tons of nut and shell per hectare. On fully irrigated estates, you can get up to like 4.5 tons. So that is more or less what is possible with the production system. That the vast majority of farmers, there are some exceptions because of different projects, but the majority of farmers are very small. And the farmers who are commercially active are definitely the larger farmers that are planting the crop. So we're talking really about people with 100 trees or more. They're the ones that are really supplying the crop into the formal market and are selling it. Yeah. So if we think about the total number of farmers that have probably received trees, it's probably in the 4.5 or 5,000 mark. Fewer than 500 of those are really commercially active, and that is important when we talk about building an industry and supplying a market. It's really important because if you have many small farmers over a large area, the crop to aggregate becomes very expensive and it's very difficult to aggregate, and there's lots of transactions. So we can make our job, which is very difficult, a bit easier by ensuring that farmers kind of get a more or less minimum number of trees. And this means that they should be getting around, I would say it would be great if you could get farmers getting up to about 1 ton or close to 1 ton per season. That also has got obviously an impact in revenue. If you only have 20 trees and you sell all the crop, firstly your household can consume quite a lot of that crop, and so on. Okay. Another thing to really understand is that we can learn a lot from the estate sector as smallholder farmers in how to approach growing the crop, how to treat it, how to handle it, but it's not going to be possible to replicate the estate production system directly to smallholders, and that's just because there's significant differences. Estates plant their orchards at the same time, so they've got uniformity of age. You don't get immature trees mixed in with mature trees. The layout is for tractors. There's no intercrops, so you've got to remember that a lot of the main spraying and access for harvest is going to be when you have another intercrop in, because it's happening December, January, February, March. This is when, if you have intercrops, they're going to be in the field, so you can't access the field for any mechanization. Because they're mechanized, they can use much bigger equipment and they can spray the tops of their larger trees to varying success, but that is not an option for you. Even with knapsack sprayers that are motorized, they still can't really get the amounts of product that you need to make the controls. So we need to think about ways of getting around that. Many smallholder fields are planted on slopes, which again is not very good for mechanization. And the reality is that getting spraying equipment accessible to enable sprays to happen at the right time in many locations is not going to be economic, not for the foreseeable future, not unless you've got a very strong cluster of farmers in a very small area. So what are the alternatives? Is that for immature trees, you can do most of the work from the ground. You can actively try and keep the trees small, and that's a big management objective in the estate sector, just to keep the trees smaller. They're easier to manage. Plant more trees which are smaller is more productive. Yeah, and if you're ever trying to decide the difference between planting 100 trees a hectare and letting them grow big, or planting 200 trees a hectare and keeping them small, always pick 200 trees. It will pay for itself very, very quickly, and I can explain why. Also, there's a lot of the inputs that are needed are specialists and are not widely available. And also the mode of application needs to be thought through. Trees like slow release fertilizers, and they also like high levels of organic matter. And so some of these products just are not available in the Malawian market, and that's something we can look at. Yeah. So the main constraint is that many farmers are not commercially active, and this is largely to do with scale and the volumes of nut to enable buying it economic. That farmers do not have access to inputs. The nursery production is inadequate to meet demand, and has been since I started working here in the early 2000s. Slower crop establishment undermines the ability to manage the crop effectively and the level of productivity from the field. The aggregation of the crop is incredibly challenging for smallholder groups. It's complex to manage the logistics. You need lots of communications. Transportation is costly. The volumes are small. So this is something that I think strategically the production system has to look at, developing clusters of farmers, mid-sized farmers, to get some economy of scale. And of course, leakage of the crop is a major issue with smallholder farmers. It's not like a commercial farm where all the crop goes to the factory and that's just the end of the story. Smallholders need to harvest, collect, dry at their farms to aggregate. They have some household consumption usually. There's theft issues, there's local market sales. So because of this, the actual commercial yield from smallholders is always going to be lower than an estate. Even if you're achieving very good yields, it's unlikely you're going to be able to sell all that crop. So we have to be more modest in our yield assessments. So you'll see yield assessments, a lot of the ones that I use assume about 3 to 4 kgs commercial yield. Even if the tree is yielding 5, 6, 7 kgs, a lot of that does not come to market. All right. So the impact of the supply of the trees and the establishment has a really big impact on yield. So here we have a graph which details out 100 trees established at different rates. So we've got this yellow graph here. So this is the amount of nut and shell it yields over the first 10 years of the orchard. You can see it all gets started planting at the same time, and then yield only really starts to pick up like in year 4, 5. Yeah. If all those 100 trees are established in one season, so say if we establish them in 2025, so this puts us in 2030, we see that all the trees start coming into production at the same time. This is the cumulative yield, so it's like how much is produced year on year added together. So we see over the first 10 years, if you establish all the trees at the same time, you'll be yielding about 2.5 to 3 tons of nut and shell at the end of that 10-year period. However, if you establish it over if you establish it at slower rates, it means that over the whole of those 10 years, you start to yield a lot less. Now, if we think that half of that rate is here, yeah. So if you establish all the trees at the same time, your production comes up really quickly, and you accumulate yield, and you start to develop yields quickly. If you establish the trees slowly, then the uptake of yield is far slower. Now remember, you're establishing 100 trees. So all these farms have planted 100 trees. So at the end of 10 years, if you're only establishing 10 trees a year, you won't get up to even a fifth of the crop if you establish them all at the same time. And that, unfortunately, is basically where the majority of the trees are. Like a 100-tree orchard is very commonly established over 4, 5 years, sometimes 10 years. Some of the smallholders have been planting since like early 2000s, the late 90s, and still their orchards are not full. And this explains a lot, I think, about why the productivity overall is very low in the smallholder sector. Now, you may see that I've put here the DAPP Sable trajectory. Now, their project is aimed to establish 100 trees within 1 or 2 seasons. Yeah, and that puts them very much up here. And I think for any cooperative in the room, this is really important, because that uptake of crop, that's crop volumes. So our research that we've done indicates that the high demand, there's a very high demand of trees, and a lot of the more serious farmers that we interviewed would be keen to receive about 250, 300 trees, something in that run. But the capacity to supply those trees at the moment is only about 12 trees per farmer. That means that for a farmer to plant what they actually want to, getting access to the seedlings is going to be very, very slow for them to be able to. Many years are required. And I think tree finance, improving supply of trees, is really critical to getting a push on the production system to get the volumes and the productivity that's really required to make this work. The nursery infrastructure at present cannot supply these tree numbers. But yeah, so if you establish all the trees in the first year, then over the first 10 years, you'll generate 4 times as much nut and shell. 4 times as much. That's significant. And the break even on buying the seedlings comes 3 years earlier. So this means that you don't have to wait as long before you start generating the type of revenue to invest in inputs, to invest in post-harvest infrastructure. So this is the other thing. So with macadamia, you need to get drying racks in place. You need to get post-harvest in place. And that's very difficult to do when you're only increasing your production by maybe 20, 50 kgs a year. It just is not going to work. Yeah. So this faster growth of production means higher revenue. It creates the cash flow to be able to afford inputs. Yeah. So the impact that the density of the planting. So by this we mean how many trees you put on a hectare. A lot of the early recommendations suggested 10 by 10 spacings, which makes it 100 trees a hectare. And again, this has a very big impact on the overall productivity that you can get from a small parcel. Most smallholders have got limited areas which they can plant. So this means that the decisions about how many trees to plant is quite complex, but this basically compares planting 100 trees in a hectare, 200 trees and 250 trees. If we think 100 trees is 10-10, 200 trees is usually done 10 by 5, and 250 is like 8 by 6 or something like that. Yeah, all planted in the same year. So we can see at the end of the first 10 years, you can increase the amount of production twofold. Yeah, revenue per year would be around 1 million quattro in today's quattros, and going up to about 2.5 million a year at maturity. This is just before full maturity, this graph, but you can see 2.5 times the revenue. And if we think the difference between 1010 and 200 is twice the number of trees, but you still get 10 meters to do intercrops between the rows. So in terms of intercrops, it wouldn't really influence how you do the intercrops and reduce the area, but it would double the potential revenue from the farm just by planting more densely. Yeah. So clones, and a bit more about sort of which clones farmers like planting, which clones are actually planted. This is again quite a big subject, so I don't want to go into it too much, but what we see is that there is no kind of clear patterns really in the clones that individual farmers want. There is quite a strong bias, and this is data taken from Anchisi and Mpompa and Unchenachena, and I think some discussions as well in Mazimba. But 816 generally comes out quite strongly. 772, 842 comes out quite strongly. 791 has got positive perceptions. But a lot of the clones, people like, one farmer thinks they do well, other farms think they don't do well. And I think this really underlines the fact that in your individual areas, you need to observe what's producing well and recommend and push those clones. Don't try and, the more clones you get is not better. What you want is the clones that are going to be productive. So you need to have a clear idea of what clones do well in your area. Yeah, so some clones, they kind of yield very irregularly. So they have a really good year, then they not very much. Other clones take a long time to come into production. These should be avoided for smallholders because people want to get the revenue earlier. So here's a couple of notes on that. But we see that there's actually a lot of difference in recommendations between different generations of planting. Like if we think that Sable is an older estate, they have a mix and it's down in Cholo, it's rain fed. Tropha is a new area, it's hotter, it's drier, it's irrigated, and it's incorporating different varieties because of that. Yeah. Bit on nutrition. So over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been doing quite a lot of work on nutrition and looking at patterns of nutrition in smallholder farms. The idea is to get an idea of how a nutrition pack could kind of work and what would be the priorities for that. We generally find that in upland areas, the pH is broadly suitable. So there's not need for major correction, but definitely liming and stuff can really help. There is a very low cation exchange capacity in the soils generally. This is the ability of the soil to be able to hold and exchange nutrients. And this is partly due to the next factor, which is very low organic matter. The soil health is not great. Doesn't have very much organic activity in it, doesn't have much just not much life in the soils, and particularly for macadamia, that's a major issue. The rooting system is very close to the surface, it doesn't like to be disturbed, it likes high levels of organic matter. Like we're talking like 3% organic matter, and most of the soils that we test are about 0.5%. So a 5-6 fold increase in the amount of organic matter is needed to really, and the good thing about that is it makes the tree healthier, the rooting system healthier, and can really get the tree health to a point where the productivity really starts to pick up. One of the issues with trees is that they're slow. So you need to start when the tree is young and keep topping up every year. If you let the tree decline, it will take several years for you to recover that. So if you think couple of years going down in decline, couple of years of correction, you could lose or be seriously reduced production for 4 or 5 seasons while you get a correction in place. Low calcium levels and a lot of potassium issues on the smallholders, and micronutrients of zinc and boron were critically low in almost all the samples. Now, zinc and boron are very important for flowering, for nut development, so a lot of premature nut drop, a lot of malformations, a lot of very small nut is largely down to these 2 elements. So in terms of managing the nutrition and the health of the tree better, we need to split it up into maybe 2 or 3 different types. The high phosphorus scenario is not very common, so I will leave that one out. But particularly immature orchards, you want them to establish well, you want to get the organic matters up, you want to be able to encourage them to get into production quickly, low mortality, and get those early yields good. If you get your early yield good, you know you're on a good trajectory to reach your productivity, and you'll get revenue coming onto the farm earlier. And smallholders will know the history of their sites very well. If it's been heavily cultivated, if it's not been rested, if the maize doesn't grow well there, you know it's got low nutrition. Yeah. Mature orchards are much more about replenishing the nutrients that come off. So the more productive the orchard, the more you need to replenish, right? Bearing in mind that large trees cannot be sprayed, so they should be kept small where possible. There are varieties that are naturally more compact, and if smaller trees could be used, it would make everything a lot easier. So what patterns do we see? We see that the nutritional problems that I just outlined there are very, very similar on the estates, the smallholders, which means a lot of the products that they use may be appropriate. And these problems have been overcome. There's knowledge in the industry, and you are part of the industry. So you need to think that the estates and the commercial farms, yes, there is a different context, but there are skills, knowledge, and expertise there that can help you make the right decisions. Smallholder sector is way more variable in terms of how the trees are planted, what the operations are in the fields, and a large range of agroecologies, which are just not found in the estate sector. If you think a co-op, maybe if I take Enchisi, it's got 5 EPAs, from quite high altitude ones that are growing coffee all the way down to Panella and like Longway Plain. This is a very big span. That's more complex than an estate has to manage. A nutritional program can help correct these nutritional issues, and some standardization approach would help the costs come down, grouping buying inputs. The big 5 to manage, the major nutrient, the major limitations on productivity: zinc, boron, calcium, and potassium. Nitrogen is not needed in high levels by a macadamia tree. It doesn't use a lot of nitrogen. But if it's very poor quality soils, it may require some addition, and definitely when it's in production, you'll need to keep nitrogen topped up. Sulfur is also very low, actually also copper as well. If you start using more copper-based fungicides, then maybe that corrects, but sulfur is an issue, so sulfur should be an addition when required. And all this is enabled by soil organic matter. Sorry, if you're watching the video, you won't be able to see this list, because soil organic matter improves the nutrient holding capacity. It cools the roots down, so the roots are active for longer, they become less stressed, they become stronger. Strong roots mean strong productivity. Cation exchange capacity is improved, aeration and drainage is improved. It just makes everything easier. So in terms of the priorities for the production system should be something like this, to complete the orchard establishment of existing farmers. This brings up the productivity of people who already know the crop to reach their full potential. We think smallholders are often seen outside as kind of all having the same problems and challenges, whereas my experience is, yes, people do face similar things, but like, for example, one farmer may have additional area to plant. One may be able to do a orchard just of macadamia and specialize in that. So as an organizations, I think we really need to think about how we get the members to reach potential. If the members reach their productivity potential, not just in terms of productivity by area, but also enabling some farmers to grow larger. And this can create economies of scale for post-harvest, for inputs, for things like dehusking, for drying, that at the moment are very strong headwinds on the smallholder industry. There is an underutilization of inputs, and improving the access to this is going to be important to raising productivity and sustaining the productivity. And also thinking maybe more strategically on developing more clusters of farmers, so mid-sized farmers or larger smallholders in close proximity to smaller farmers to make the whole economy work better. If it works economically for farmers, they'll invest in inputs. They'll look after the crop. Whereas if it's marginal or they're not making money from the crop, it will be a lower priority. And you see in the older growing areas that people who have planted the trees end up drifting away from the cooperatives or the organizations. And this is not because they don't like macadamia. They're still involved, but they don't see a direct benefit. They like having the trees, but that's not a commercial farm. So you need to separate out these different types of farmers within your organization. Ones that just want a few trees, Phillips, have another crop on the farm. That's great, but you can't base a co-op on that. For a co-op needs to be, or a farmer organization needs to be based on people supplying volumes in a ton, 2 tons, 3 tons would work. But if everyone's supplying 50, 100 kgs, it's not going to work. So that's done through planning. It's done through strategically prioritizing things. So where can the productivity gains come from? As we showed, increasing the stocking density from 100 to 200 or 250 would be great, can double the potential yield. That's more than any input is going to give you. Likewise, if they are planted over 1 or 2 seasons, again, that enables a 4-fold increase in revenue in the first 10 years for the farmer. But also for the co-op, that gives them a farmer who's going to be selling to them more significant volumes. Mulching. Now, mulching, as we've just said, is a critical thing to do before you start thinking about putting other inputs on. It's really important, organic matter for macadamia trees. So you really need to push that. It may need to go hand in hand with some termite control if that's an issue. So that's something you need to think about. Also getting good recommendations for mulches, like what should be in the mulch. You can look at doing things with husk. You could avoid things like rice husk can have problems. It's very dense. So anything organic material, instead of burning crop residue, mulch it, compost it. Yeah. By improving the recommendations on clones for each area, you will reduce this variability in productivity in each field. And by doing that, you'll raise the overall productivity of the field. Even if you have 5, 6 trees that are just not producing well, then your production's going to get lower. So make clear recommendations on clones, only promote grafting of those clones in the nurseries under your control. If you're bringing in nursery stock from outside, make sure it is of varieties that are going to grow there and that it's been thought about. The other thing is that smallholder farmers should really be told that. That's not really a decision for the farmer to make. Maybe there's some options, right? But that's a piece of technical advice that should be coming from the cooperative. So you need to have clarity about what grows in your area, what doesn't, and send those messages to the cooperatives. Leakage is an issue. Like I said, the thing I didn't mention to that is that I find that actually harvesting is not done particularly well on the majority of smallholder fields. If you go around at harvest time, you see a lot of nut drop on the floor. There's stuff that's been missed in previous collections. And this is partly to do with that at this time of year, there's a lot of activities going on in the field. You've got intercrops there. The intercrops are probably quite close to the trees. It's difficult to systematically go around the orchards, collect the nut on a regular basis, thoroughly. So I would really recommend that you keep the lines of the trees, you keep clear of intercrops. Don't plant between the trees and all that. So you want to be able to see the base of the trees. You want to be able to see the whole line of trees, and much easier to go through and harvest. Now, I haven't done any analysis on this, but I reckon about a quarter of the crop sits on the floor and is never collected, or is collected manually outside of a collection. So weekly collections from the floor more thoroughly, and that's free crop. Like you've already grown it, it's already there. So that could be a way of increasing the commercial yield without putting any additional work into the fields. Improving access to slow release fertilizers and micronutrients. I think you wouldn't have to do a whole nutritional program, but you can basically assume that your boron and zinc levels are low and you need to top them up. Boron can be applied to the floor, to the soil, and also on a foliar basis, but it doesn't stick around very long in the soil and is difficult for the tree to uptake. On the one thing I haven't really spoken about here is integrated pest management, managing things like Macadamia nut borer and stink bug. Now these are two particularly stink bugs are very serious problems in the estate sector. And because of all the issues with spraying and ability to get spray up, I don't think any smallholder production system is going to have a mechanized spraying program as part of it. So because of that, we need to start utilizing other avenues. So there's lots of things that kind of affect these populations. Parasitic wasps is one. There's other beneficials that also do. Fungal agents which affect the insects to reduce their ability to reproduce, and the population doesn't increase so much. Also, it's important to note that the rejects that you see for a lot of smallholder deliveries to factory are stink bug, and there are also things like pitted centers, onion rings, and these are like more nutritionally or varietally driven. So there's some things that you can sort out relatively quickly, and I think nothing here really costs money apart from the fertilizers and the micronutrients. So we have really tried to think about how to make this as appropriate as possible. So try to give you an idea of the overall, what I think is like a realistic vision of the production system that would work. And I've kind of put it into 4 different boxes, kind of. Firstly is to encourage more uniformity and raise the number of trees that each farmer has. Plant at a higher density, focus on 3 to 5 clones in each area, encouraging at least an average of 100 trees per farmer and a minimum of 50. and incorporate farmers within your organizations that have 500, 1,000, who have got like 3-4 hectare farms. You can't see, but if I look outside my window now, I live in Spain, and there's this citrus everywhere. Now, I'm sandwiched between a big citrus farm for Spain, which is 8 hectares, and all the rest of the plots are 0.5 hectare and 1 hectare plots of citrus. But what they have is they have them in one area, right? Cost of production is not massive, but they've made a system that works. Okay, if these small farms were dotted all over the place, they wouldn't be a business. Okay, there needs to be an acknowledgement, I think, that the smallholder sector is never going to, or at least for the foreseeable future, emulate a mechanized production system. By mechanized, I mean largely tractor spraying, mist blowers to reach the tops of the trees. So because of that, and even if people could afford tractors, the layouts of the orchards and the intercrops mean that you can't really mechanize anyway. So a principal aspect of this is to keep the trees small so you can do operations from the ground. I think the third aspect is to have like a clear idea of how to manage the nutrition and the health of the tree. And this is basically going to be increasing the organic matter levels, improving the quality and the frequency of mulch applications, putting onto the tree zinc and boron micronutrients. There's probably other things that need to go in as well, but definitely those two. And importantly, like that, apart from the micronutrients, is very low cost and accessible. And in fact, unless you've got relatively good organic matter levels in the soil, I really wouldn't invest that much in fertilizers. Until you get that root system healthy, anything you put on in fertilizer, you're not going to maximize the impact from it. So you're not going to get as much value for your money. Incorporate natural controls where possible to substitute an IPM system that is not really accessible. It's very expensive. The inputs are specialized. There's issues with mist blow onto food crops potentially. We can look at fungal pathogens, parasitic wasps, pheromones, these type of things to help reduce the populations of your key pests. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you found that interesting, and I'm very keen to get some feedback from you all, and yeah, looking forward to discussing this with you. Have a successful conference.